can take the boy out of Brooklyn. Can't always take Brooklyn out of the boy. I have the same instincts that I've had. They don't go away. You know, sometimes I want to deal with things the wrong way, but I catch myself, you know, as much as I can.
People, they somehow want to be something that you know they don't want to be.
Exactly.
But yet we still have this thirst, this want. How do you explain that? Why is everyone so fascinated with this lifestyle?
You know, Brian, for any kids listening, I always say the mob life, Cosa Nostra Mafia, evil lifestyles. Gang life, the same thing. Why? Not because the guys are evil. Look, I met a lot of good guys in that. I really did. And I was one of the guys, so I'm not going to call people evil. But the lifestyle is evil because I don't know any family of any member of that life that hasn't been destroyed, devastated. So any lifestyle that does that to a family has got to be evil, bad. And that's why I tell these young kids, you cannot stay on the street. You're going to destroy your family and yourself. I don't want to wake up. I want to lay here, I don't even want to wake up. A prison guard walked by my cell. Franzese, you okay? He said, get away from me, man. I said, I chased him, I don't want to talk to him. He came back a minute later, he pushes a Bible through the slot on the door, and that was the life-changing experience for me. Brian, I've seen people come out of situations, put mine to shame, that they should be so congratulated on how they were able to overcome obstacles and circumstances, really. To others looking at me, it's like, wow, Michael, and I understand that. But to me, looking at others, I'm in awe. So a lot of people have been able to do this. You gotta be determined, you gotta surround yourself with the right people. And for me, it's a faith God thing. I believe God has had a different plan and a purpose for my life. Made that very clear. Not perfect, I still do things wrong, but my intent is right.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go? This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Michael Franzese, the former American mafia boss turned motivational speaker, broadcaster, and author. You were a captain in the feared Colombo crime family and became known as one of the most notorious mob figures in New York City in the 1980s. At the height of your powers, the feds claimed you were generating close to $1 billion a year in your gas tax scheme, which made you the second highest earning mobster of all time, right behind Al Capone. Fortune magazine named you as one of the 50 most wealthy and powerful mafia bosses, and more remarkably, you are the only high-ranking official of a major crime family to ever walk away from the life and live to tell the tale. You served 6 years in federal prison, with 3 of those in solitary confinement, before discovering Christianity and beginning a journey of redemption. Today, you tour the world educating young people on the dangers of living a life of crime, while also serving as a motivational force and business mentor to companies and individuals looking to take advantage of your incredible life experience. Michael, welcome back to London Real.
Good to be here, Brian. Good to be back.
Is this a sit-down? Is this what we might consider a sit-down?
This is a sit-down, yes. It's a little less formal, but it's still a sit-down.
And you had once said, I think, on your programs that back in the mafia life, it was all full of sit-downs, right?
Everything was a sit-down, Brian. Sometimes, most of the time, very serious, business deal, maybe somebody's life at stake. But then, hey, where are we going to eat tonight? Let's sit down and figure it out. Everything was a sit-down.
So when you hear that word sit-down, does part of you think, uh-oh, or was it just something that you regularly did and it could range the gamut?
Because I was so active, and I had a lot of guys around me who's getting in trouble here, there, you're always sitting down. I mean, it was part of my normal day, sitting down over something, whether it be business dispute, a guy got himself in trouble, a new territory that we wanted to take. It was just all the time.
And what are the key components of a sit down? I mean, I guess literally you don't want someone to be listening to you. I guess you want the privacy, but what are some of the things you think about when you do a proper sit down?
Well, they're structured, and you have one guy making the decision. Let's say it's really a high-end sit down where the boss is involved. You got two captains, you got the boss. The rules are, you can never be disrespectful. You can't, for instance, you're a made guy, I'm a made guy. We're disputing something. You're lying through your teeth. Lying. I know you're lying. I can't call you a liar. If I call you a liar, I lose the argument, even if I'm 100% right. So you got to be respectful. Can't raise your voice and get up and get all animated. You're not allowed to do any of that. The decision at the end of the day is final. Win, lose, or draw, that's it. Whatever the boss decides at the end, it's final. And you go on with your life. So, they could be very serious too, Brian, trust me. And the thing is, the old timers were very cagey. And they tried to get you to make a mistake during a sit down, which would immediate failure. You immediately lose. So you had to be very adept coming in. You had to know who your opponent was. You had to understand their mentality. You couldn't let them lure you into making a mistake where the boss would have said, hey, you don't do that here, you lose. So they were very technical, very technical.
How do you learn the art of the sit down then? Because that's part politics, like part journalism. Sounds like some of the interviews I've had when I was running to be mayor. Like they're trying to trip you up. You say the wrong one thing, that's the thing that'll kill you. Like how do you learn how to negotiate that?
A lot of it is experience. You make mistakes in the beginning, but I was fortunate. I had my dad who schooled me well and, who taught me basically how to conduct myself in these things. And one thing, Brian, the major thing my dad taught me that has worked for me my entire life, and in a serious way, I'll get into it, is be a good listener. Don't run your mouth. Don't be the first to, present you. Just be a good listener. Let the other guy make a mistake. Think, hard. Be prepared going in. And for me, I became a major target of law enforcement. Major target. They never got me on tape saying anything wrong. Never. There was one undercover operation they had me on. They had 83 tape recordings on me. It was this whole thing with Don King and Al Sharpton. They couldn't use one of them because I never made a mistake on the tape because I was always listening. I was careful how I spoke. And I credit my father and listening to him. Okay, I understand it, Dad. So you got to be careful who you talk to. Same thing in a sit down. Let the guy present himself. I always say this too. You go into a meeting, sometimes you're the smartest guy in the room, but you don't want anybody to know it. Let them think you're a dummy. You don't know anything. And they're yapping away, right? It's a big advantage. There's other times when you're not the smartest guy in the room. But if you keep your mouth shut, nobody knows that. They don't know it. So you let them talk, commit themselves. By the time they're finished, then you can become the smartest guy in the room because they told you everything, So just different techniques that in the mob life, very important if you're going to climb the ladder and be a success. And really in a legitimate world, same experience I've found.
And should you always assume you're being recorded and conduct yourselves accordingly?
Yes. Yeah. My dad used to tell me the telephone is a cop. Just look at when you're talking on the phone, you're talking to a cop. You know how it is in life when certain things just stick in your head, little things, but they're so important. So I've always been that way.
I wanted to talk about fathers today. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about my own father, who's turning 80 years old this year. Mm-hmm. And I actually put him on camera a few years ago and put him in one of my films. And I asked him some hard questions, Michael, about the divorce when I was 7 years old and, the way my childhood was. And what I found is when I listened to him, I judged him less and I understood him more as a man who was making decisions the best he could at the time.
Sure.
And who was a product of his father, who was in the Dust Bowl and had to literally make something from nothing. And I'm wondering, when you think of your dad, who was born in 1917 in Sicily, and who by definition became a major part of your life, whether you wanted to be him or didn't want to be him. When you think about him as a man, Sonny Franzese, what do you think of? Who was that man? And has your concept of him changed over the course of your life?
Yeah, let me correct one thing. He was born in Naples, Napoli.
In Naples.
Yeah, I don't want him to get mad at me. I say sincerely.
Napoli, all right.
But yes, my perception of him has changed. Unfairly at times, and I'll tell you why. He was my absolute idol growing up. I loved my dad. I idolized my dad. He was a man's man. He was a good father, a good husband to my mother, before all the stuff started with him. And then it became just crazy havoc when he became this major target of law enforcement, and all the harassment that him and our family went through changes things. But, you know, unfairly, my dad did all this time in prison. And before he went in, he was an icon in that life. I mean, amazing, right? When he came out, it wasn't the same. And I expected it to be the same for him, unfairly, because prison takes its toll, and that street takes its toll. Different people move into different places. So I was waiting to see Sonny Franzese take over the world again. It didn't happen. He still had respect, don't get me wrong, but it didn't happen. And by that time, I was a made guy myself. So I'm figuring it's me and him. This is it. It didn't happen that way. So I kind of lost, all right, he is human. He's not the main guy in his life. There are other guys, you know? And again, that could have been a little unfair, or maybe it was just me growing up and understanding the experience, you know? But I can tell you this, I love my dad till the end. Obviously, when I walked away from the life, that was a major issue between he and I. But we patched that up because he understood I wasn't there to hurt anybody. I just wanted to preserve my family life, basically. And the one issue I had with my dad is...
Again, he was the underboss.
He was the underboss of the Colombo family. Yeah.
And so it doesn't get much bigger when it comes to his profile
and
how big he was, and iconic in even the early days of the establishment of the dominance of the mafia. I mean, he was a key figure in that.
Brian, he was the John Gotti of his time in terms of law enforcement investigation, media attention. Every day in the paper, 7, 8 different agencies trailing him all the time. He was indicted 4 times, 3 times in the state. The feds were after him. It was constant. You know, if you would have had the internet back then, forget it. It would have been every day, like Gotti, the same thing. So if he didn't go to jail, he'd have been boss of the Colombo family, no doubt, 100%, because he had that much respect on the street. He did the work required, you know, he was a guy. But unfortunately, his life was derailed that way. But the one issue I had with him, when we finally sat down, I said, Dad, do you realize that this life destroyed our family? My sister dies of an overdose of drugs. My brother, 25 years a drug addict, drove us crazy, ended up cooperating with the government, becoming an informant, testified against my dad. I mean, it doesn't get any worse than that. My mother and father, at the end of my mom's life, I can only describe their relationship as being ugly, because she blamed him for everything that went wrong. She was 33 years without her husband. He was in jail. 33 years, and all this stuff happened, right? So I said, do you realize that you being part of this life destroyed this whole family? He said, it's not my fault. I said, what do you mean it's not your fault? He said, I was framed, which he was, 100%. I'll take that to the bank. My dad was no bank robber. That's what they accused him of. He was framed. But I said, Dad, you weren't framed because you were a doctor, a lawyer, or a priest. You're framed because you're a street guy like me. We're criminals back then. He couldn't accept it. He wouldn't take responsibility for it. And I said, that's wrong, Dad. You got to take responsibility for what happened in our family. You can't blame Mom or this and that and that. But that was the only like real sticking point with us, you know?
But is that the mindset it takes to build something like your father built? Like, you have to think that what you're doing is ultimately right.
Yes.
And that it's the only way. And he, you know, and he was again brought in with this whole culture and these rituals and this family that where he couldn't see another way out.
No, and you know what it was with him? This is another, you know, fault on my dad. His legend in that life was more important than anything. He wanted to be known as the one guy that would stand up under any circumstance, which he did. I mean, he could have cooperated. They would have cut him slack, but no way. He died with his boots on. He wouldn't want to be known as anything else. And that was it. But unfortunately, he sacrificed his family. And that's why, you know, Brian, for any kids listening, I always say the mob life, Cosa Nostra Mafia, evil lifestyles. Gang life, the same thing. Why? Not because the guys are evil. Look, I met a lot of good guys in that. I really did. And I was one of the guys, so I'm not going to call people evil. But the lifestyle is evil because I don't know any family of any member of that life that hasn't been destroyed, devastated. So any lifestyle that does that to a family has got to be evil, bad. And that's why I tell these young kids, you cannot stay on the street. You're going to destroy your family and yourself. That's it.
So crime doesn't pay. Is it a karma issue? Is it just if you're doing bad things will happen to you? How do you view it now?
You know, look, I don't know if I believe in karma. You know, as a Christian, I believe that you reap what you sow. So I guess you can call that karma. You know, you reap what you sow in life. But, you know, it's, you can't hang out with the wrong people and be accountable to the wrong people, continue to do the wrong things and think it's going to end up okay. You know, it's the definition of insanity, you know, keep doing the same wrong thing, think you're going to have a different outcome. So, you know, and look, in this life I have found out, number one, we are who we hang out with. We're judged by the people we surround ourselves with and who we are accountable to. When I was on the street, I was accountable to my oath, to my boss. I was a criminal. Every day of my life on the street, I'm violating the laws of God and the laws of man because that's who I was accountable to. Now, you know, with the grace of God, I've been able to, you know, transform that part of my life. I'm accountable to God, to my wife, to my children, to people that trust me. So I'm on the right path. I try to stay on it. But, you know, remember this, you know, it's what I tell these guys too. You can take the boy out of Brooklyn. Can't always take Brooklyn out of the boy. I have the same instincts that I've had. They don't go away. You know, sometimes I want to deal with things the wrong way, but I catch myself, you know, as much as I can. But this is a tough life to navigate. There really is, Brian. And I think you've experienced that.
I have. And meanwhile, you've got the public that are fascinated and almost idolize this gangster lifestyle.
Yes.
The movies, the casinos, the Goodfellas. Part of the reason you get so much attention and exposure. People, they somehow want to be something that you know they don't want to be.
Exactly.
But yet we still have this thirst, this want. How do you explain that? Why is everyone so fascinated with this lifestyle?
You know, I don't know if you've been watching or have you seen yet, I don't know if it's here yet, but there's a new television series called The Offer.
No.
Okay. When you get it, watch it. It's very good. And it's the prequel to the making of The Godfather, how The Godfather got made. And at the same time, they're telling the story of Joe Colombo, the Italian-American Civil Rights League, and how that turned out to be his demise. But it also tells how much influence that Colombo and our family had over the making of The Godfather. Now that was my era. I was right there throughout all. So it's exciting to watch the show. There's some discrepancies, but it's a great show. The actors are through, everybody's doing a great job. But what was my point on this? Where are we going with it?
You made the ultimate form of media that then allowed people to idolize that lifestyle, which was The Godfather.
Here's the thing. It's all about the media. It's all about entertainment. I mean, look, when The Godfather came out, guys on the street were acting different because it elevated the persona of guys on the street in a big way. I'm telling you, I witnessed it. I watched it. All of these movies. I speak to young kids. Michael, come on, man. You know, you had the cars, you had the money, you had all the women, you had people catering to you all the time. I said, I know. That was Goodfellas, right? Did you watch the second half of the movie? Who got killed? Who lost everything? Who went to jail? They don't see that. They only see the money, the power, and that's an aphrodisiac to people. Brian, when I first started speaking, I was pretty well known in New York. We had a hot name. Maybe on the West Coast, Florida, yes, because where I got indicted there too. In the Midwest, Texas, nobody knew who I was. They put on a marquee, the mob guy is going to be there, standing room only. People are interested in the lifestyle. It's all the media, Hollywood, entertainment, the news. I mean, John Gotti, come on. You know, how many people wanted to be John Gotti? How many people wanted to be Michael Corleone, Vito Corleone? It's the media.
Because they see the upside, but they don't see what comes.
They don't see it, and they don't pay attention to it.
Right, right. It's almost like the movie Wall Street. You see Gordon Gekko, but you don't realize at the end everybody went to jail.
Exactly.
Right, and so it's a human concept. Maybe we want something, we don't want to pay for it.
Yes, and you know, my wife and I were talking. There was, I don't remember, it was an FBI agent at a conference. Yeah, I think it was at a conference, and they asked, "What's this fascination with the mob?" And I think he gave a good answer. He said, England has their royalty, United States has the mafia. And that's how and you know, I thought about it. I said, I think he's right.
You had a real moment in your life when I think you got asked to go to a sit down, and the bosses had some real questions about the money you were making and if they were seeing a chunk of the money they were making. And I know you've talked about this sometimes, but I think it was a major turning point for you where you saw that, okay, my quote unquote family is also potentially the people that can also end my life.
Yes.
And that family also includes family members, you know,
Yes.
like your father. I was wondering if you could tell me about that moment, because I feel like that's when it got very real for you, when you had that meeting. So I don't know how we need to set that up. Maybe you were making a lot of money in the gas tax scheme. Obviously, the media of you making money was getting back to some of the bosses.
What happened was there was an article in one of the publications, I think it was Long Island's Newsday, I don't remember, that said a couple of things. It said I was bringing in $2 billion, which wasn't true.
This is in the 80s.
It was in the 80s.
Before people were even using the word billion.
Yes.
Right, okay.
$2 billion. And they said that I was getting powerful enough to break away from the Colombos and start my own family. It was like a fantasy movie. There's no reality to it whatsoever. Just reporter made it up, right? Who knows who he's talking to on the street. So now it gets into people's heads. I'm telling you, Brian, because you know that life is treacherous. My dad was home on parole, big name. This guy now has got a big crew. He's got the Russians, with him. I had a big crew. They start getting into their head because anytime there's a problem, families don't go to war with each other. It's always an internal war over power. Who's going to be the boss? Who's taking over the family? So, and we had a lot of those situations in the Colombos. So now they call me in, and I say, one of the horrors of that life, you make a mistake, your best friend walks you into a room, you don't walk out again. And unfortunately, in my 20 years on the street, obviously I've experienced that. So now my dad calls me. If you want me to tell you how it's set up, my dad calls me, he was home, he said, hey, the boss wants to see us. I said, okay, what time you want me to pick you up? Because my dad was on parole. He wasn't allowed to be around anybody but me. I had no record at that time. I'd take him everywhere, right? He said, well, Mike, they want to do this differently. They want me to come in first. They want you to come in second. I said, why? We were both captains at that point. I said, no, Dad, there's talk on the street. And I said, we ain't going to do that. We're going to go together. No, we got an order. We got to obey the order. This is my dad, right? We argued about it. The first time I ever really had an argument with him, right? In the early 80s. Finally, I threw my hands up. We're in the driveway of his house in Long Island. I said, Dad, I've been listening to you all my life. I don't like this, but I'm going to listen to you again. So he leaves, or I leave rather. Later that night, another captain, Jimmy Angelina, calls me. He says, Mike, meet me on such and such a place in Brooklyn. The boss was on parole, so we had to have a covert meeting, make sure we weren't being followed, right? So I park my car. I get in the car. Jimmy picks me up. There's a guy sitting behind me. It's a little bit recognized, right? A lot of guys around. And we're driving to the house where this was going to take place. It had to be covert. And Jimmy's not telling me anything. I knew Jimmy my whole life. We're both captains. He's not saying anything, right? I'm waiting for him to tell me what's going to happen. He starts talking to me about the Yankees. I'm a diehard Yankee fan. I want to hear about the Yankees that night. We get to the place. It was midnight. It was late at night in August, summer night. Parks the car. I get out of the car. It was about a 30-yard walk from where we were to the car down to the basement apartment. And I'm saying, Jimmy walks behind me. I'm assuming the other guy behind him. I'm getting nervous. I'm saying, this is a bad setup. I'm saying, what the heck's going on here? And Brian, I kid you not, when I relay this, I can kind of see the crickets. I can hear it. I can smell the flowers. It became so real. I'll tell you this, when you think you're going to meet your maker, your senses do become very keen. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I'm walking and I'm saying, this is it. I'm going to get killed here. And people have said to me, why didn't you cut and run? And it wasn't heroic. It was robotic. I said, no, this is it. This is it. But my knees are weak. My heart is beating out of my chest. When we go down those stairs, I'll never forget, and that door opened. I don't know how I didn't collapse just from, the feeling, because I knew what would happen. The guy's there, and boom, 1 second, I'm done. But obviously I'm here, you know, so they grilled me about the gas business and back and forth, and I started getting mad. Because, Brian, I'm handing in $2 million a week. It's a lot of money. And don't forget, I didn't go to them. They didn't come to me, I went to them. Now, I didn't invent the scheme, but we did it better than anybody else. There's no question about it. I had the Russians with me. We really had it down. We had it down. So, and I had a 7-8 year run with this, so I'm bringing a ton of money. I'm saying, you're questioning me? You don't have to do anything. Nobody's got any exposure. I'm bringing you all this money. You're upset with me? I started getting mad. But then I said, wait a second. I'm going to walk out of here. You don't get mad with the boss. You know, let me keep my cool. We finish up. They want to have a glass of wine. Everybody's hugging. Everything's great. I said, Jimmy, take me to my car. I had a long ride. I go back to Long Island. I just wanted to get out of there. So we get in the car. It's just me and Jimmy now. And I'm ready to turn to him because he's my friend. And just really give him a piece of my mind. You don't warn me, you don't tell me. So he says, stop, wait, Mike, before you say anything. He says, I got to tell you this. I said, what? He said, you handled yourself very well in there tonight. He said, this was really a problem for you. I got even more mad. I said, you knew that and you don't tell me? You're ready to walk me in a room just like that. Then he was smart. He looked at me and he said, if it was the other way around, would you have told me? He really hit me right. And I said, no. He said, oh, this is the life we lead. He said, you know it better than you grew up in it. We're driving home. We're driving to my car. I go to get out of the car, Brian. He grabs my arm. And he said, I'm going to tell you something. You're not going to want to hear this, but take it to the bank. It's true, Michael. I said, what? He said, your father was in there before you tonight. He didn't help you one bit. He hurt you. Brian, I was devastated. First of all, I couldn't process it right away. My father, him and I were like this. And as I'm walking back to my car, I said, okay, I get it. I know my dad so well. He didn't go out of his way to hurt me, but what he said is, hey, I don't do anything. If my son is stealing, he takes care of everything. I don't do anything. He kind of just, instead of saying my son would never do that and just really stand up, because if he got a little angry, he can get away with it. He's my Sonny Franzese. But he didn't do that. And he kind of threw me under the bus. And what happened to me after that, I said, man, if this life can separate father and son, what do we really have here? Now, I didn't meet my wife till some time later, but I can tell you this, Brian, as much as I fell in love with her, if this incident didn't happen, I don't know if I would have ever walked away from the life, because I don't know if I could have hurt my father in that regard.
Right.
More for him than anything else.
Why didn't he stand up for you?
There again, always being clean, never being, I don't know. I don't know what was happening, and I don't want people to get the wrong idea, but when I was coming up in that, my dad was away, I started getting a lot of respect, a lot of courtesy, and people would look at, my mother was a strange woman. I don't know if there was any jealousy there. And I hate to pin this on my parents, because I understand life and I understand what happens. I don't know if my father felt like, maybe there was too much attention on me. I don't know, Brian, and I don't want to stick that on him. I certainly would never want that. Look, my dad and I were equal in rank, but I gave him every courtesy. As far as I was concerned, he was the guy. I would never go against him, never anything, but I don't know, Brian. It bothered me. I never said anything to him. You know how he found out about it? He read it in my book. I was tortured. Should I put this in a book or shouldn't I? But it had such an impact on my life. I said, I have to. He read it. He called me. He said, I got to see you, right? I go see him. I didn't know what it was about. And let me tell you the other part. Jimmy Angelina, a few years later, they walked him into a room. He never walked out, the guy that drove me. Wow. That's that life. But he said to me, you believe this stuff? And I said, yeah, Dad, I believe it. I said, I have no reason to disbelieve. I said, and I know the way the night went. I said, but it's okay. I'm not mad. Don't worry. No. He said to me in his own way, he said, if Jimmy was alive, I'd kill him again. For telling you such a story. I don't make a joke out of it, but I know it was true. I know it was true.
Right.
But,
you both knew it was true, even if he couldn't tell you it was
He would never admit to it. My dad, he said something he taught me. He said, never admit to anything, son. Never. Never admit to anything. I said, okay. So when he taught me that, I knew that he would never admit to it no matter what.
Did he once tell you that if we had just done something illegal or questionable, a minute later, we would never ever talk about
Absolutely, absolutely. He said, Mike, if you and I did something, 30 seconds later you ask me about it, I'm going to say, what are you talking about? Why would we talk about it? And he's right. Think about it. What do you got to say? It's done, it's over, unless there was a problem that you know. But my dad was so cautious that way early on. We speak in the house, we go in the bathroom, he turns on the faucets, he flushes the toilet, and our heads are in the faucet. I thought he was out of his mind, you know. But he was, and you know what? He was right. They put a bug in our house when the house was being built. And there was a lot of recordings with him and my mom, mostly nonsense stuff, but he was right about that.
Right. And so that night was slowly the beginning of the end for you in that life. It was that, meeting your wife, and you starting to realize that I can't be here in the long run. You're going to have to find a way out.
Yeah. You know, a lot of guys were turning informant. Two guys that I knew for a long time, I found out they were working with police for over 20 years. The racketeering laws were coming in. I said, man, we're in trouble here.
The RICO Act really worked.
No doubt.
And it broke something that looked unbreakable. The omerta, the code, the ritual that had worked for, I don't know, hundreds of years.
Yes.
Now they found something that almost broke that.
Yes. You know, they always say it was the young guys in that life that couldn't stand up like the old guys. Not true, Brian. Not true. A lot of old timers cooperated. A lot of bosses cooperated because they didn't have the laws. Look, 30, 40 years ago, you got a 10-year sentence. You did 3 or 4 or 5 years, no big deal. You come out. You got 15 years, you're doing 6 or 7, no problem. Nobody was really flipping, becoming informants. Under the racketeering law, you're getting 100 years. No bail. Sentencing Reform Act, no parole. You can't fight this. They tell a guy, hey, you want to cooperate? If not, get comfortable in your jail cell. You're going to spend the rest of your life here. Guys don't stand up under that. It's not easy. Not easy, man. So I saw all these things happening, and I had a 14 agency task force that was designed just to put me away. I beat them 5 times. I said, how many times am I going to beat them? They're going to put me away. And when they do, I'm done. That's it. I'm going to spend the rest of my life in jail. So I knew it was falling apart.
It was only a matter of time. This was
only a matter of time.
The new technology that would have broke anybody, anytime. It didn't matter your dedication, the old schoolness. It was just, the results were so dire. Like you said, you spent the rest of your life in jail. Whereas before, it was very hard to prove that you had given the order. That whole structure of the mafia is set up to protect the top, which keeps it alive.
That's right.
And the RICO cut right through that.
Cut right through it. Right. Giuliani put all the bosses on trial. That never happened before. Not all of them, and the whole commission. And what are their sentences? 100 years. And what did they really do? It was some union scheme. It was, I don't want to say it was no big deal. I don't want to get people, but I mean, they're not killing people and bringing drugs. It was a union scheme that was shaking down people for money. You get 100 years for that?
Right. Oh. And I want to get to what happened with you and the plea and the time, but if we just look at the mafia as a kind of a piece of human technology that evolved over time, probably to combat the power structures that were happening maybe in parts of Italy at the time. Talk to me about that structure, because it's based on secrecy, omerta, these rituals, these made men that now are untouchables. Have you ever thought about that as a piece of kind of human technology that allows people to regain power in maybe a society that was previously controlled by armies or wealth? I mean, is that kind of what the mafia is? And it worked for a long time until the RICO came. Yes,
what worked for us, I always say this, Cosa Nostra in America was made powerful by the government during the years of Prohibition. Because listen, any organization without money doesn't survive. It doesn't get to be what it is. During Prohibition, hundreds of millions of dollars were obtained by the mob. And that's where they started to get big. That was it. But once that happened, and then Luciano came in and created the structure the way we know it now, the commission the way we know it now, that worked because, number one, you had the code of omerta. What omerta means, people don't understand what it means. It means silence. You're never supposed to even admit that the organization exists. Doesn't exist, never talk about it, that's it. It doesn't mean, when you take the oath, it doesn't say, okay, I'm going to go out and kill 10 people, I'm going to do this, I'm going to rob, I'm going to steal. No, the organization doesn't even exist. And there's rules put in place to make sure you do that, right? So we existed in America for over 100 years on some very, very tough conditions. Why? Because we were organized, we had a real structure, and we had money. And we had a lot of political power. We controlled the unions. In America, you know this, Brian, you control the unions, you control the country. Why? Because you got millions of people which represent votes for a candidate. You got trust funds, pension funds, hundreds of millions of dollars that buy politicians and anything you want. So we had that. We were organized, unlike some of these other groups that are not real organized in that way. That's why we survived. And you know, I have to say this too. Frank, I'll give you examples. Frank Costello, Joe Colombo, my father, even me to extent. People wanted to be around us. They wanted to be around us. We didn't have to go chasing them. They came to us. Hey, Mike, you know, I'm going to see a show. Okay, what do you want? You want a ringside table at the Copa? You got it, no problem. That means a lot to some people. You walk into a room, they feel strong because they're with you. And a lot of guys had that way of getting around people where you just want to be part of it. And that's what it was. Not everybody was a thug on the street and carried themselves like, it wasn't that way. Frank Costello was a diplomat. They called him the prime minister. Joe Colombo was a polished guy, you know, and a lot of these guys were like that. So people wanted to be around them.
It was just a way of doing good business at the end of the day.
Yes.
And when you hear about a lot of tales of what the neighborhoods used to be back in the day, I mean, they were places that were safe.
100%.
And the mafia didn't like chaos, because chaos is bad for business.
No.
And then you would keep everything, and then people would want to do business with you because you could do good business.
Absolutely.
Maybe back in the day when that structure wasn't necessarily obvious anywhere unless you came to the mafia. And with the mafia, you knew there was rules, there was structure.
Brian, you know how many guys come to me? General Electric credit, big company, Mazda Motors of America, huge insurance companies. Guy has a scheme to defraud his own company. They will come to me because they figure, number one, I could finance it for it, and I could protect them, and I'm never going to snitch on them. They would come to us. People think that, you know, mob guys would sit in their social clubs and figure, okay, we're going to go after this company or that company or this company. No, they would come to us. The whole gas thing, I didn't invent it. I didn't even know what the guy was talking about. He came to me with a scheme, and I was able to blow it up into something huge. But that's how most of these things happened.
Because you could bring protection, capital, structure, and then they would get paid. You're a bit like the stock market, the government, and the army all rolled up into one, right?
Yeah. And I don't mind if you're stealing from the government, because who cares? You know, my targets when I was on the street, you know, we weren't going to neighborhoods and robbing houses and all of that. And my whole crew said, that's hands off. We don't do that. That's it. Bank, they got plenty of money. Insurance company, no problem. The government, every day, let's do it, you know? I had bigger targets like that. And a lot of guys were like that. I wasn't the only one. You know, so I don't want people to get the impression that everybody was a street thug and we were robbing houses. I mean, it happened 100%. I'm not, you know, denying that. But that kind of stuff doesn't last. You got to do things where money is coming in, where political power comes in, where you got control. If you don't have that, no structure will last.
Right. It's got to be good business in the end. Otherwise,
absolutely.
You can't keep doing that business.
Of course, you attract the law enforcement, but you fight. What else you do? You fight them, and you protect yourself as best you can. You fight cases.
When you look at something like a Google today, or a Facebook today, or some of these corporations that pay billions in fines, and they have lobbyists in the government, and they're doing business in the background, do you say, wait a second, this is the same thing we were doing?
Same thing. Same thing. You know, we were a criminal organization to begin with. They're not known as a criminal organization, but look, they get around and violate more laws by moneying. Lobbying is the biggest thing in come on, Brian, it's unbelievable, the favors that they pay for, the way they insulate themselves from regulations that you and me would have to abide by. You know, because look, politicians, they haven't changed. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, they're worse now than in my day. And I had people that were working with us. But I had 18 licenses, you know, to collect the tax on every gallon of gasoline. You had to be licensed. I couldn't get licensed. I got 18 licenses. I was paying for them. You know, a guy was making plenty of money with me, and he got them for me. You don't get that without political connections, but they're the same now. It hasn't changed.
Right. They call them rackets, but if you look at, say, a pharmaceutical company like Purdue Pharma, I mean, what did they do? They ran kind of a racket, right?
Sure.
Dressed up as a business.
Absolutely.
And so many of that with political control, with ridiculous profit margins, violating codes of man, codes of law.
Absolutely.
And yet it has a different name to it.
Mm-hmm.
But you see so many similarities between that
100%.
mafia. Is the world a better or worse place without the mafia the way it used to be in the 80s?
The neighborhoods were a better place, no doubt about it. My neighborhood, Greenpoint, where we grew up, my father, you know, had so much influence there. You could walk down the street at 3 a.m, leave your doors unlocked, out the door. There's no crime in our neighborhood. No crime, because we didn't commit crimes in our own neighborhood. We protected. People loved us. The only thing we ran in the neighborhood was the numbers business. But people loved that. Old ladies, moms, grandmas, they're all playing the numbers, right? Because they had a shot to make a lot of money. And what now? The government has legal numbers business. They took it from us. Same thing. But the communities were a safer place. We didn't stand for any. I remember, look, when the Son of Sam, if you remember that whole thing in New York.
Yeah, it was a serial killer that was on the loose in New York and had everybody scared. Yeah.
Yes, we were after him. If we would have caught him, forget it. It would have never happened because he was into some of our neighborhoods. And we had a tip one night. We went when it went after him. We couldn't get him, but our neighborhoods were safe, no doubt about it. Now, listen, there's going to be a lot of people in law enforcement will disagree with me, but what we played the game and got in trouble for, politicians are doing it now legally. Same thing. They extort people legally. We did it illegally because we didn't have a license to do it at that time. But it's the same thing. I wrote a book.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, A Mafia Democracy. Brian, it's not a fluff piece, and it's not. I did a lot of research, but what got me going on this, I'm watching it. You know, I'll be honest. 10 years ago, I wasn't as interested in politics. I started getting interested because I got kids, I got grandkids now. I want to see what this country is looking like. I'm watching. I'm saying, these people are worse than the mob. They're operating just like us. They have this Machiavellian ideology. And I'll tell you how it breaks down. Machiavelli, who's kind of the patron saint of the mob. You go into prison, you got to read the book, The Prince. Fascinating book. Machiavelli was a brilliant guy, fascinating book. But he had a philosophy. And what he said was this. He said he was advising his prince how to maintain control of his kingdom. And he told the prince this. He said, look, you could lie, steal, cheat, kill if you have to. Whatever you got to do to maintain power is okay. But to the outside world, you always got to look honest, upright, and have integrity. And I'm watching the government. I'm watching and I'm really starting to study. I'm saying this is the way we operated, the same way. Lobbyists. People come into Congress worth $100,000. They go out worth $7 million. They get paid $170,000 a year. How do you get that kind of money? Because they get around insider trading. I blew the lid off of them in this book. Why? It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's the system. And I want people to see what's going on because I love my country. And I want it to be the same for my kids and grandkids. And what I tell people is, look, this is what's going on. It's very mob-like. I made very valid comparisons. And I said, we have to stop this. You know this, Brian. You got a partner, he lies to you once, all right. Second time, okay. Third time, hey, that's enough. These politicians get up there and lie to every single day on video. One thing today, the next thing one thing to get elected, the next day they get in office, it's a whole different thing, to the detriment of the people.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.